Get her off my net. I need someone who actually knows close air support, not someone who trained for it on a simulator. Lieutenant Keane said this to no one in particular and to everyone in the room at the same time, which was a specific kind of cowardice that Lawson had learned to recognize. The kind that delivers a verdict about a person without ever looking at that person directly. He was standing at the front of the Tactical Operations Center at FOB Striker, holding a grease pencil and staring at an acetate map overlay, and his voice had the crisp, corrective tone of a man who had decided that a problem existed and that identifying it out loud was the same as solving it. 22 days later, Staff Sergeant Lawson called a danger close airstrike at 46 meters from the lead vehicle of a convoy pinned in an L-shaped ambush en route Dover. Her primary radio had been destroyed by shrapnel. She had 90 seconds before the aircraft needed to return to base. She got it done. 14 soldiers came home. Lawson had been a JTAC for 4 years, which was long enough to know that most people had no idea what a Joint Terminal Attack Controller actually did, and that explaining it rarely helped. The official description, the ground-based specialist who coordinates close air support and guides aircraft onto targets, tended to land somewhere between impressive and abstract in the minds of people who had never seen it done under fire. What Lawson knew, and what the explanation missed, was that being a JTAC was not a job you did with a radio. It was a job you did with every calculation you had been running, consciously and unconsciously, since the moment you stepped outside the wire. Altitude, geometry, threat axis, wind, aircraft speed, munition type, the distance between the target and the closest set of friendly boots. Every number had to be right, simultaneously, in real time, under conditions specifically designed to make you wrong. She had gotten into it the way she got into most things that mattered, by proving repeatedly and without fanfare that she could. Her father, Master Sergeant Lloyd Lawson, retired, had spent 26 years in Army signals. He raised her in a household where communication was precision, where you said exactly what you meant. You checked your equipment before you needed it, and you never assumed a transmission had been received just because you had sent it. She grew up understanding radio, the way other children understood conversation, as a medium that rewarded clarity and punished carelessness. She enlisted at 19. She went in as a fire support specialist and cross-trained toward JTAC qualification the first chance she got. The selection process was brutal, and the pass rate was low, and the culture around it, at that time, was not exactly welcoming to women, which she had understood going in, and had filed alongside every other obstacle she had encountered as something that was true and real, and also not relevant to whether or not she was going to do the work. She passed the qualification on her first attempt. Whether that was remarkable or unremarkable depended entirely on who you asked and how they had already decided to think about her. She arrived at FOB Striker in Diyala Province in February of 2007 as an attached JTAC for 2nd Battalion, supporting Captain Greer's company for the deployment. Greer was methodical and trusted his NCOs the way experienced commanders trust good tools without ceremony, because the alternative was inefficiency. Lieutenant Keane arrived 6 days after she did, transferred in from a different battalion. He was 26, an ROTC officer with 1 deployment on his record, and the particular energy of someone who had been told he was capable for long enough that he had stopped checking whether it was true. He was not careless. He was organized, punctual, thorough in the mechanical parts of his job. But he had a habit of arriving at conclusions before he had finished asking the questions, and when those conclusions involved someone whose presence didn't fit the room he had expected to walk into, he was very good at finding technical language to express what was, at its core, a personal reaction. Sergeant First Class Gerard was the first person who made Lawson feel like she was in the right place. Not through anything he said. Gerard rarely said anything he didn't have to, but through the specific texture of how he treated information. When Lawson spoke in a briefing, Gerard listened the way he listened to terrain analysis, as data without assumption, letting it sit before he responded. He had been in the Army for 21 years and had the face of a man who had stopped being surprised by people a long time ago and had, in that process, become genuinely fair. He was the human barometer of the company. When soldiers wanted to know how to feel about something new, they watched Gerard first. The first time Keane made a comment about her presence on the radio net, Gerard cleared his throat once. He did not look at Lawson. He looked at the map and he said, in a voice that carried no emotion whatsoever, that Staff Sergeant Lawson was the most qualified terminal controller the company had, and that her net access was not a courtesy, it was a capability. The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet, when someone has said something correct and complete, and there is nothing useful left to add. Keane moved on. He did not acknowledge what Gerard had said. He redirected to the next agenda item, the way men like Keane redirect when they have been answered in a way they cannot argue with and have decided that not arguing is the same as not losing. Lawson noted the exchange. She filed it carefully in the place where she kept things that were true and inconvenient and needed to be carried without letting them slow her down. She had been carrying things like that for most of her adult life. She was good at the weight by now. Specialist Acosta was 22 years old, from Albuquerque, and had the specific quality of paying attention that in younger soldiers sometimes looks like nervousness, and in older soldiers looks like wisdom, and in Acosta looked like both simultaneously. He had been in country for 5 months. He had developed the habit, Lawson noticed, of positioning himself near whoever seemed most certain of what they were doing. He was not reckless. He was a student. He found her at the vehicle staging area on her 3rd week and asked, with the careful directness of someone who has decided that a question is worth the risk of asking it, what a JTAC actually did when things went wrong. She told him, not a short answer, a real one. He listened the way people listen when they understand that the information has a use beyond the current moment. On the 8th of March, Lawson sat down with the ISR imagery package from the previous 72 hours and did what she always did with imagery. She looked at it the way her father had taught her to check a radio. Not for what it was showing, but for what it was not showing that should have been there. The market intersection at grid NK 4471 on Route Dover was one of the busiest commercial points in the sector. Fruit vendors, hardware stalls, foot traffic that peaked between 0700 and 1000 and tapered through the afternoon. She had logged the pattern for 2 weeks. On March 8th, the pattern was wrong. The intersection at NK 4471 was 30% less active than any day in the previous 14. The specific vendors who anchored the north side of the market, the ones who had been there every single day without exception, were not there. A white pickup truck had made 3 slow passes along Route Dover between 0200 and 0430, stopping each time near the concrete drainage culvert at NK 4471. She knew what this meant, not because she was guessing, because she had studied the pre-attack behavioral signatures from 7 documented ambush events in the sector, and the pattern she was looking at matched 5 of them. She brought it to the morning briefing. She walked through the imagery, the traffic analysis, the historical comparison. She told Keane that NK 4471 was being staged for an attack on the next Route Dover convoy movement, that the timing indicators suggested a 48 to 72-hour window, and that she recommended either adjusting the convoy route or clearing the intersection before movement. Keane looked at the imagery. He said the decrease in market activity was consistent with a local observance, and that the truck passes could be attributed to any number of civilian activities. She said she understood that was one interpretation. She said the combination of factors, taken together, exceeded the threshold for pattern of life anomaly. He said the mission parameters were set, standard route, standard timing. She looked at Gerard. Gerard looked back. Nothing passed between them that needed language. She went back to her bunk that night and worked through the geometry of NK 4471 until the numbers were as automatic as her own breathing. She identified the building on the intersection's northeast corner, 3 stories, reinforced walls, a firing position with clean angles on anything moving along the road below. She calculated distances from that building to every position a convoy vehicle might occupy at the moment of initiation. She calculated the munition, the approach heading, that would give an aircraft the cleanest terminal geometry without walking ordnance through the convoy itself. She was not doing this because she planned to use it. She was doing it because if she needed it, she could not afford to think about it then. The math had to already be finished. On the morning of March 11th, a 14-vehicle resupply convoy rolled out onto Route Dover at 0615. At 0643, the lead vehicle hit the culvert at NK 4471. The explosion disabled the vehicle without destroying it. There were wounded inside. Before the convoy could respond, small arms fire opened from the northeast building and from a position further south, a classic L shape. The convoy was stopped, exposed, and taking fire from two directions, and the soldiers in the disabled lead vehicle could not be extracted because the northeast building had a direct line on anyone who approached. Lawson was in the second vehicle. She had her radio up before the echo of the explosion finished moving through the air. Her primary, the PRC-117, took a round through the housing 11 seconds into the contact. Not destroyed. Destroyed would have been cleaner. The housing was cracked, the crypto card had shifted, and the transmission was degrading in real time. She switched to her backup PRC-152. She raised the flight on frequency. A section of FCA-18's, call sign Warhammer, had been on a 40-minute loiter over sector. She had 17 minutes before bingo fuel, not 17 minutes to decide. 17 total, including the time already spent switching radios. She had the 9-line ready. She had memorized this geometry 3 days ago. She transmitted. The pilot, Warhammer 11, came back immediately. He had the target building. He had the friendly position. He read back the distance. He said the danger close acknowledgement procedure required her to confirm. She understood the risk to friendly forces. She confirmed 46 meters. She understood. Warhammer 11 asked for one more confirmation. The standard was 200 meters. 46 was not in any manual as a survivable margin for a GBU-38. She told him the physics were survivable on the correct attack heading. She gave him the heading. She told him the soldiers in the disabled lead vehicle had 30 seconds, maybe less, before the enemy element repositioned and finished what the IED had started. Warhammer 11 was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, "Cleared hot." She designated the building. Warhammer 11 rolled in from the north, the heading that put the blast effect into the structure and away from the road. In the time between weapon release and impact, Lawson radioed the convoy element lead and told every vehicle to get down. She said it in the flat, complete voice of someone who has already done the math and is now simply executing what the math requires. The building came apart. The fire from the northeast stopped. The fire from the south position broke contact before the smoke had finished rising. 14 soldiers came off route Dover, including the 3 from the disabled lead vehicle, who had injuries but came out breathing. The after-action report was 11 pages long. The words the JTAC appeared in it 9 times. The name Lawson appeared in it 0 times. Major Claremont, the battalion operations officer, read the report at 0800. The following morning, alongside the radio transcripts, the system logged automatically. She called Keane into her office at 0827. Garrard was near enough to the hallway to hear the shape of what happened, and he passed it to Lawson without editorial. Claremont had told Keane that his report referenced the JTAC 9 times without attaching a name. She had told him the radio transcript read, verbatim, Warhammer 11, this is Staff Sergeant Lawson. I have a 9-line for your review. She had told him that the decision to use a title instead of a name in a document describing the most significant close air support event the battalion had executed this deployment was not a professional choice. It was a choice, and she expected him to understand the difference before he submitted another document. The report was rewritten. Keane found Lawson in the JTAC planning space that afternoon. She was rechecking her radio equipment with the methodical attention she gave everything after a contact. Not because she expected to find something wrong, but because assuming something was fine was how equipment failed you when you needed it most. He came in. He stood at the distance that indicated he was there for a real conversation, not a briefing. He said the report had been amended. She kept working on the radio. He said he had spent the past 18 hours trying to construct an explanation for why her name had not been in the original document and had not found one that held up. He said the habit he had been in, referring to her by role rather than name, was something he had done without fully examining, which he understood was not an excuse. He stopped. He started again. He said what she had done en route Dover, the geometry of it, the margin she had worked inside, the outcome, was something he was not going to see again in this career. She set down the radio. She looked at him steadily, not to make it easier, not to make it harder, just to let it be exactly what it was. He said, "I'm sorry, Sergeant Lawson." The room was quiet. She thought about every true thing she could have said at that moment. She had a long list. She chose the one that was complete and needed nothing added to it. "Don't do it again," she said. Not to me, not to anyone who works for you. He nodded. Yes, Sergeant. It was the first time he had given her that rank and had it feel like something that actually belonged to her. The Bronze Star with Valor came through 31 days later. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford presented it at a battalion formation. He read the citation in full, her name, her rank, her actions, the distance, the window, the result. 14 soldiers. He looked at her afterward and said, quietly, that the Army's doctrine on danger-close procedures would need to account for what she had done, and that he intended to make sure the records said so clearly. She called her father that evening on the DSN line. He answered on the second ring. She told him about the citation, about the 46 meters and the 90 seconds en route Dover. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it had only twice before in her life, the quality of something that had moved past whatever he normally kept in front of it. He said, Lloyd Lawson's daughter with a Bronze Star. She said, you knew this was where I was headed. He said, knowing it and hearing it are two completely different things. She laughed. He laughed too. And for a few minutes across 8,000 miles on a military phone line, they were just a father and a daughter, and that was everything. She came home in September. She found a shadow box on the kitchen table of her parents' house in Fayetteville. Built by her father from walnut he had milled and fitted himself, with her citation inside, her name appearing in it 11 times, every instance highlighted in yellow. He had gone through the document with a marker specifically so she could see, in one pass, every place where the record said what it was supposed to say. She stood at that table and looked at her name highlighted in yellow and felt something complete itself quietly. And without announcement, the way a calculation arrives at its final answer, not with noise, but with the settled, permanent certainty of something that has just stopped being in question. She went back in. She always went back in. She finished her service 12 years after she started it, and then she took a position teaching JTAC qualification at Nellis Air Force Base, which was exactly where she was supposed to be, because the thing she had spent her career doing, reading the geometry that others couldn't yet see, holding the math steady until the moment it mattered, was something that could be taught if someone was willing to teach it. One afternoon in the third year of her instructor tour, a young specialist named Tran came to her after a simulation exercise and asked, with the careful directness of someone who had been thinking about it for a long time, how she stayed calm during a danger-close call when the margin was inside anything the doctrine covered. Lawson looked at him. She said, "You're asking the wrong question." He said, "What's the right question?" She said, "How do you get to the point where the margin doesn't feel like a margin anymore? Because by the time you're on the radio, it's too late to start doing the math. The math has to be done already." She tapped her temple once. "In here, finished. What you're doing on the radio is just reading back an answer you already know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "How long does that take?" She said, "As long as it takes, and then you do it again." He nodded. He went back to the simulator. She watched him go. She thought about a grease pencil and an acetate map overlay, and a voice asking for someone who actually knew what they were doing. She thought about 90 seconds and a pilot who said cleared hot when every standard in the book said he shouldn't. She thought about her name, highlighted in yellow, 11 times on a page that had once held none of it. She turned back to her own work. There was another class coming through in the morning, and the math did not teach itself.